From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. The legislature returns tomorrow for what is likely to be the last week of the 2022 regular session. There are 4 legislative days remaining, and the plan is for the House and Senate to meet Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday in a rare 4-day week to end the session. Keep in mind that they don't all have to be full days. For example, if the legislature goes until midnight on Thursday, a new legislative day starts at 12:01, and they could roll right into it. In any case, it is going to be a fast-paced week here at the State House as lawmakers try to get important legislation across the finish line. A lot of that will involve the House and Senate working together to make sure each chamber's bills get considered. House Majority Leader Nathaniel Ledbetter explained that in more detail.
We'll do a lot of cleanup. We got a lot of House bills that we need to get out of the Senate. I know that the Senate will help us do that, and we got a lot of Senate bills. As of today, this will be the last day we can move House bills. It'll go through the process, through the committees and through the Senate committees and through the body. So now we'll work on Senate bills coming in next week. We'll come in 4 days and start on Tuesday and work through. I mean, I think we will probably go ahead and do our last day, the way it sounds, talking to the Speaker this afternoon, and we don't have anything that we think the governor would veto, so for that reason we'll probably complete the 30 days.
The House is slated to take up a number of Senate bills when it convenes tomorrow. Let's take a look at some of the high-profile bills. First up is Senate Bill 200 from Senator Roger Smitherman that would delay the retention provision of the Alabama Literacy Act by 2 years. This is the provision that requires third-grade students who cannot read proficiently not be promoted to 4th grade. Governor Kay Ivey and many Republicans have argued for a 1-year delay instead. Senate Bill 170 from Senator Arthur Orr would take new non-English speaking students' test scores out of a performance marker used to assign letter grades to public schools. Orr says schools with high numbers of English language learners, or ELLs, are unfairly hurt by the annual grading system used to compare schools and communities. Senate Bill 282 from Senator Garland Gudger would limit the amount cities can retain from traffic fines and fees. This is in response to the speed trap situation uncovered in Brookside, Alabama. And Senate Bill 272 from Senator Dan Roberts would regulate and set standards for telemedicine in Alabama. Right now, leaders call Alabama the Wild West when it comes to telehealth and say that could lead to scams. One bill not on the agenda, but still awaiting House passage, is Senate Bill 117 from Senator Will Barfoot. It would end the practice of suspending driver's licenses for unpaid fines and fees from non-moving violations. State Representative Marika Coleman is carrying the bill in the House and said there is a bipartisan effort to get it on the floor.
What we found, we got advocacy groups to come and talk with us about the challenges that people have to getting employment, to being able to secure a home. You have to have a valid driver's license to be able to do those things. And there are quite a few folks that are poor, that have not been able to pay for traffic fines, or they have failure to appears because people move, especially a lot of low-income folks move a lot, and the court might not be able to find you, and their driver's license is being suspended. And so what does that do? It further pushes them into poverty.
The House now also has the Education Trust Fund that passed out of the Senate last week. A conference committee is expected on Tuesday. House Education Budget Committee Chairman Danny Garrett talked about the significance of the historic pay raises included in this year's budget.
I think in any business, you tend to look at, we don't have merit raises necessarily in the state budgets like you do in other organizations. But what we found out from a teacher standpoint, in particular, we're competitive on the low end of the range. We were competitive on the upper end of the range. In the middle of the range, we were not so competitive, and not only with surrounding states, but also even with the private sector. And so what this allows is for some of those step increases to be to make some sense, to have some distance between the steps and an orderly and appropriate migration based upon the years of service that match from the lower end to the top end. So it's just a reinforcement of those people in that middle matrix, which are the places where we lose teachers. We are losing people that we get them in, although now we're getting fewer in because of all the issues we've got with teacher shortage. But then we're also, to retain the teachers, we need to do this to address that pay.
The Senate doesn't yet have an agenda to work from, but President Pro Tem Greg Reed says he expects to see some controversial bills brought up on the floor.
There may be some contentious themes that we've got coming out of committee. Of course, we're going to be focused on House bills in the Senate. We've got several bills that are part of packages from the House that are very important to us, that have been things we've worked on with packages like broadband, issues associated with business privilege tax, other House bills that are in our tax cut package. That'll be a $160 million tax cut for the people of Alabama. So several of those items will be priorities.
We'll be right back with tonight's guest, State Superintendent Eric Mackey.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts. Keep up with what's happening with Capital Journal.
Next, I'm joined by Dr. Eric Mackey, Alabama State Superintendent of Schools. Dr. Mackey, thanks for coming on Capital Journal.
Glad to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Well, there are a lot of education issues that are afoot right now. We're here in the final stretch of the Alabama legislature, 4 days left. The Education Trust Fund, it's almost there. Passed the Senate last week. There's talk of a conference committee this week. But in it, this is a record budget, $8.2 billion. What really stands out are these teacher pay raises, not just the across-the-board raise, but the step raises for later in their career. How much of a difference maker is this for Alabama schools?
Well, we actually already have teachers who are calling and trying to find out how, and some have already followed through and rescinded their retirement, even though it's not passed all the way through yet. So we think this will be huge in teacher retention, having teachers at the end of their career, toward the end of their career, saying, hey, I'll stay another 3, 4, 5, 6 years for these higher salaries. Of course, that also changes their pension for the rest of their life. So there are a lot of reasons to stay. And I also think it's going to help us on the front end. This is going to be a major recruitment tool. I know Senator Orr and Representative Garrett both have made it really clear that they want to put money in the classroom. Where does money matter? Where do we do the most? Nobody does more in this business than the teachers. And so every position is important, from a cafeteria worker to our bus drivers to our classroom teachers, principals, central office people, to our State Department of Education. All the positions are important. But the one position that touches a child's life every single day, over and over, in and out, those are teachers. So I'm just thrilled to see this kind of investment in the teaching profession.
That's fascinating. That folks, even before this has become law, have said, hey, we want to come out of, or we don't want to retire quite yet. Well, that's because that's what these step raises did, right? We had the matrix of if you're there for 25 years, it was a certain percentage. It goes up as your service goes up.
Yeah. So people who are starting out in their first 3 years are going to get a 4% cost of living adjustment, which is also very much appreciated. That's across the board. But then as we get later in the career, really starting at year 9, there's an additional increase, and those folks are going to get a little bit more. It goes to 12%, to 14, 15, 16%. Folks who top out 35 years now will get a little over a 20% raise. We actually have people now calling about coming back to work too. So if folks worked maybe 30 years and they retired, they can come back. Every year we have people who come back into the profession, but we're getting more calls now about people wanting to come into the profession than ever before.
Well, I know that Alabama had been a leader in starting pay, at least around the Southeast, for starting out teacher. But other states had surpassed us in terms of those step raises, 5, 10, 15 years into their career. Does this get us back on par?
It does. We leapfrogged most states with this proposal. So we did have the highest starting pay in the Southeast, actually, but it petered out really early. And by about the 10th or 12th year, we were behind most of the southeastern states. This will put us on par with anybody in the southeast region. It puts us ahead of most. There'll only be a few standouts like Nashville. So not the state of Tennessee, but the city of Nashville pays really high salaries, and so there'll be a few standouts that'll be above our state matrix, but for the most part, we'll be ahead of most southeastern states.
Wow. Now, I talked to Senator Orr about this a little bit, and because it's not always just competing versus other states or other cities. Now, in this reworked economy, you're probably also competing against the private sector.
Yeah, that's actually our biggest competitor. So we know that the number of people going into teaching has gone down. It's down about 40% between 2010 and 2017. It has actually ticked back up some, but the bigger problem is that many people who graduate with a teaching degree never teach because they make more in the private sector. We lose a lot of teachers in the first 5 years because they're recruited out to the private sector. And so this will allow us to compete with the private sector, which is really our biggest competition. Our biggest competition now is not Florida and Georgia. We still have that, but our biggest competition is private industry.
Now, I talked to Senator Orr. I also talked to Majority Leader Ledbetter to ask if they were worried about proration, because you see this big number, $8.2 billion, record spending, and you see these pay raises that 5, 10, 20 years down the line we're going to have more in those ranges. As the leader of the agency, are you concerned at all about overspending and having to cut back later?
Fortunately, I'm not. So I think we have still a pretty conservative budget. As you know, this year with the budget, we're putting money back in savings, fully paying off the PACT debt. So there are a lot of things that are going on to make this a conservative budget. I think that even if we had a downturn in the economy a couple of years down the road, which we're all worried about when the federal money begins to peter out, that we would see, there'd be adequate money to, even if we were tight budgets, we'd be okay. We have savings, those kind of things. Way down the road, I think there's no question that the growth will far exceed this, and so we'll be in good shape. What we might see, just trying to predict down the road, so like this year across the board we got a 4% raise. There have been multiple, as you know, back-to-back raises during the Ivey administration. And so we might see smaller smaller cost of living increases because the money's built into the step increases already. So I think there will be cost of living increases, but we might see smaller cost of living increases for a few years.
Switching gears to numeracy. This is a bill we've talked about before. Really gained a lot of momentum this session, almost out of nowhere. It has now been passed by the legislature on the governor's desk. This is, of course, where the state is attempting to really attack the math problem, the deficiencies in our math instruction. From the state superintendent's perspective, are you satisfied with the tools that this bill gives you to address this issue?
Yeah, I am absolutely thrilled with all these new math coaches that are going to be coming our way. Back to 4 years ago when I interviewed for this job, I had laid out 3 priorities. Of those, one was math, and I said we had to have new math standards, which we've been able to do now. We had to have high-quality math instructional materials, which the board just adopted last year. And so this is actually the first year that we have put those standards and that high-quality mathematics materials in place. So it takes a while to do these things. And then the third thing was we had to have math coaches that could work with our teachers to help our teachers teach at a deeper understanding. And I know sometimes people say, well, shouldn't our teachers know how to teach math? And sometimes teachers, they're a little bit repelled by having a coach in their classroom. But look, Bryce Young has a quarterback's coach. Pro quarterbacks have quarterbacks coaches. So even the best can make their game, if you will, better. And that's what we're talking about. It's not just teaching, adding and subtracting, multiplying and dividing. We do that, but that's not going to get us where we want to go. in these national and international tests. They're more about deep application of skills, and that's where our coaches will come in and help do that. So this is just thrilling to me. It's a process that we've been working on for 4 years, and this is the capstone. Remind all our viewers out there, it'll still be a while. So the first math coaches under this bill won't go into the classroom until fall of '23. We don't fully implement all of them until later in the decade. But this is a major step forward, one that I wish we had done a long time ago, and very excited about it.
And I find it interesting the difference between this, one of the differences between this and the Literacy Act is whereas the Literacy Act, the accountability was on the student, right? We're not going to allow students to promote to 4th grade unless they can read. This is more on the school or school system. If a school continues to fail, continues to show lack of improvement, or school system, there are ways that the state can come in and remedy that problem.
Yeah, exactly. And much like with the Literacy Act, we keep saying we don't want to talk about retention, we want to talk about prevention. Same way with math and numeracy. We hope we never have to do any of the accountability measures because if schools are doing the work on their own, the math coach is working with those teachers are improving instruction, then we won't have to do that. Now, the premise is, though, that down the road, if you do have schools that are just not getting it done, then the state could come in and just run those schools and make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. I have again, just like I am with the retention piece and literacy, we don't want to focus on that. We want to focus on prevention, intervention, getting things right from the beginning.
Now, I know that you were recently in Washington, D.C. on a national panel on education issues. Did this come up, what we're doing in numeracy?
It did come up, actually, because I was on a panel where we talked about what we're doing with our COVID funds, our ESSER funds, federal relief funds, to catapult our states forward. The panel I was on included myself and superintendents from Pennsylvania and Indiana. And I was able to talk about the Numeracy Act because, remember, we took our federal funds and invested in a math coach pilot program a couple of years ago. So we're already doing this. We're already deploying about 50 coaches across the state, gathering evidence, seeing what works and what doesn't work. We're going to be able to use that now to accelerate the work with our new state-funded coaches.
Now, there was talk when this bill came up on the House floor, there was talk about Common Core somehow being, secretly included in this bill. Can you address that from the state superintendent's position?
Yeah, it's definitely not a Common Core bill. In fact, I would call it an anti-Common Core bill. It makes it very clear that we are not ever going back to Common Core. Where people get confused, and I understand that, is that some of the standards we have now overlap with some of the Common Core standards. There is no way we'll ever get away from that. So for instance, the first thing in kindergarten is teaching children to count. And we're going to teach children to count from 1 to 100. Common Core requires children to learn to count from 1 to 100. It'd be foolish for us to say, well, if Common Core requires counting, then we as a state are going to not teach our children to count. Obviously, we're going to teach our children to count. Remember that even when Common Core came in, something like 85 or 90% of those standards were already our standards because math is math. So I do understand why there's some confusion. The big thing about Common Core, though, when it came in that many of us were concerned about, is that when you signed to this national compact, you were saying, hey, we're going to let this national group decide our standards. Even though those didn't change much, there was a lot of consternation. I had some myself about this idea that we're letting an outside group in the future determine where we're going. Whether that's math, English, social studies, science, it doesn't matter. There was a lot of concern about it. Well, we've undone all that. We no longer are part of that consortium. So anyone who might fear that, well, look, what about when Mackey's gone? If down the road, new state board, a new superintendent says, hey, we want to rejoin the Common Core, well, now it's very clear that that's not going to happen.
I see. Also, when the bill was on the floor, we heard a lot of concerns from lawmakers about whether or not the teachers that are coming out of our colleges right now are just on average, up to the task of teaching modern subjects. Do you have any thoughts on that from your position?
Sure. Yeah, I think our teacher prep programs are doing an excellent job of getting teachers ready for the basic, let's go in the classroom and do the work. But here's the deal. We know a lot more about the science of learning today than we did 30 years ago when I was in college, or actually more than 30 years ago when I was in college, or even 10 years ago. Even when we launched the Alabama Reading Initiative in the early 2000s, we know so much more about the science of learning. So we want to be constantly, again, coaching and helping our teachers to use the most accurate, up-to-date stuff. Just quickly, if I could, point out, like back to my football analogy. So we had some winning football teams in the 1960s, but if you were still running the same offense, same defense, using all the same structures today that you were using in the 1960s, you'd have a losing team. Because there's so much more. There's more about weightlifting and about the science of athleticism that modern coaches, they're putting in their practice. Well, we have to do the same in education. Every year we have to get better.
So just because reading or math coaches are valuable to teachers doesn't mean it's not an indictment on the education programs at our colleges.
No, not at all. It's just about building new skills, building your capacity every year.
Real quick, while I have you, on the floor tomorrow is this bill that delays the Literacy Act's holdback provision. Again, I know that you don't want to focus all the attention just on the holdback, but it is an important provision of the Literacy Act. The bill from Senator Smitherman would delay the holdback provision by 2 years. This has been debated the last year or so. The governor has argued, no, let's just do 1 year, based on the data that we have in. Let me just ask you, and that's what also the board recommended, was that 1 year. Let's just say they do pass a 2-year delay. What are some of the potential consequences that come from that?
Well, as you point out, a 1-year delay is what we recommended, but certainly a 2-year delay is not going to be the end of the program. We're still doing all the work behind the scenes, all the teacher professional development, all the classroom improvement, all the teaching using the science of learning. We're doing that work. I think the only thing we would see differently is that if there's a 2-year delay, by the time the delay does kick in, then students, and I understand this because I listened to the debate up in the Senate, many students then are going to have had the benefit of more years post-COVID instruction before the delay kicks in, or before the retention kicks in. And so I think our numbers when we do finally do the retention will be much smaller than they would be this year. As you know, we were concerned about last year's numbers and did ask the governor, and she agreed and recommended a 1-year delay. So the worst case scenario would be no delay, I can tell you, because that means we would have this retention going in about 4 weeks, and students have already taken the test this year, and so there'd be a massive amount of work that had to be done this summer. So we really do want to make sure that there's some sort of delay in the retention, and we implement what the legislature passes, and we know that 2 years is what's on the floor in the House. We'll see what happens.
Is there a concern at all, this cohort of students this year, perhaps maybe even next year, if they go to 4th grade or they go to 5th grade, but there will be at least a percentage of them that aren't quite on par with their fellow students with reading?
Yeah, we're worried
get them
about
caught
that.
up?
Oh, yeah, we're worried about that anyway because of the COVID decline, and so we're working right now. It's a little bit in the weeds because we're working on some middle school strategies. We're getting a lot of calls from school districts about wanting their middle school teachers now to be letters trained, wanting resources and support from middle school. As you know, our whole arm for reading instruction and intervention is the Alabama Reading Initiative, which by law can only work in K through 3. So we have pulled together some federal funds under the ESSER plan and put together a little bit of support for middle school. Now they can use their ESSER funds, so if a local school says, hey, we really want to train our teachers, they can do that. And what we're doing is building at least a foundation of support for them, but we cannot serve those grades beyond 3rd grade with the Alabama Reading Initiative.
Well, lots to follow. I appreciate your time. We're out of time, but we'll have you back after session to review what actually gets passed.
Absolutely. Look forward to it.
Okay. We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page.
Few individuals in the history of American sport have possessed greater athletic ability than Bessemer, Alabama native Vincent Bo Jackson. Auburn University's second Heisman Trophy winner, a three-time All-SEC and two-time All-American selection, Jackson is the only running back in Auburn history to rush for more than 4,000 yards in a career. In 1986, both the NFL's Tampa Bay Buccaneers and MLB's Kansas City Royals drafted Jackson. Deciding not to play for the Buccaneers because they didn't want him to also play baseball, Jackson signed his first professional contract with the Royals. The next year, the Los Angeles Raiders drafted Jackson with the understanding that he would also be allowed to play baseball, making Jackson one of the few athletes to succeed in both professional football and baseball at the same time. In March 2013, ESPN Sports Science named Jackson the greatest athlete of all time. He was inducted into the Alabama Sports Hall of Fame in 1996 and the College Football Hall of Fame in 1998.
That's our show for tonight. Thanks for watching. We'll be back tomorrow night at 11 o'clock with more coverage of the legislative session. For our Capital Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.